Okay, so we're going to get into a lecture on transferring data from controllers. And so in our MVC app, a lot of topics here. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about view bag versus view data. And so we've used view bag and view data more as a transferring from a controller to a view. Right, so the title is to how to transfer data from controllers, and so this is from a controller to a view, but we're also going to learn some tools to transfer, new tools, to transfer from one controller to another controller. We're going to take a little bit closer look at this action result hierarchy. So C#, everything is object-oriented, and in object-oriented languages, you have a hierarchy. That hierarchy is inheritance, and interfaces and things like that belong in inheritance. And so why are we going to look at this? Well, our controllers have methods, and those methods have return data types. And that will help us understand the kind of data that can be sent back from a controller, right? So these return data types will be sent out of our methods. And it just turns out there's a lot of ways that our methods can return data. There's a lot. And I've taught this class before, and I've been exposed to this information before. And frankly, there's still, a lot that I have to dabble with because of this hierarchy. There's just so many different kinds of data that can be sent back. Okay, and then bullet number 3 is a really interesting topic, this concept of a view model. And so to make this about my learning journey, we learned what a model is, then you learn what a view is, and you learn what a controller is, and then you start tying these things together. And so you kind of get a feel for this MVC pattern, and then right away people start talking about VMs, view models. And it's like, wait a minute, I learned these components individually, and now you're throwing this new term at me, which is a view model, which is a combination of two terms, and I don't, like, what is this? You know what I mean? So we're going to get into what is a view model, what are its benefits, and we're going to use view models, okay? And we will start using view models today. Again, we're going to talk about redirection. And so from these controllers, kind of where does the execution of code go to? And so typically out of a controller into a view, right? That's the typical workflow, out of a controller into a view. But if you're looking at bullet number 4, it says describe how one method can redirect to another method. And so again, we're not just going standard out of the controller into a view, but from one controller into another controller. We're going to learn about something called the PRG pattern, the post redirect get PRG pattern, and why that's useful. I think this is a very useful pattern because we've all been in a scenario before where if the website would have used this pattern, it would have been a good thing. So we'll kind of get into this PRG pattern. View data, and here's something new, temp data. So again, we've got these different view bag and view data. We're going to talk about the difference between those. View bag, view data. Again, here's view data, but here's a new one, temp data. So I kind of hit the difference on view data. These are both dictionaries, okay, to store information, but basically temp data is new. We haven't seen that. And then when we learned about temp data and like the benefits of temp data, and for the life of me, I cannot remember the name of the JavaScript library, and I know I taught it, so I should remember it. What was the JavaScript package that we brought in last semester where you had the little animations pop up and it was colorful? And huh? Toastify. Yeah. Okay. So if you remember Toastify, fun name. I couldn't remember the name. If you remember Toastify, you know temp data. right? So there's your correlation, right? You understand it's just a temporary message that kind of is there once and then it goes away. Okay, that's temp data. And then to understand temp data, it comes with some methods, and so we get to learn a little bit about temp data and its methods. Okay. Okay, so to kind of spin up a templated MVC app, what we're looking at here is a standard C# hierarchy. Right now, our methods, they all return a data type of iActionResult. Why do they all do that? Well, that's just a really flexible way of saying, hey, all of these, all the kinds of data that you can potentially return, they all implement this interface. Therefore, it doesn't really matter what you're returning out of this method as long as it's a view result, a redirect result, a JSON result, or a file result. All of them implement the interface. Therefore, they're all valid return types. Therefore, you know, the return data type on our methods is just iActionResult. Okay, and it's just a really flexible way. And to demonstrate that in code, you know, as we always do, create a new project, and I'll just show you the return data type as my computer spins, and I'll just call this Chapter 8 lecture and keep the project and the solution the same in the default location, all this long-term support. You don't have to really follow this. This is going to be pretty basic. Feel free if you want to. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a method and I'm going to show you the return data type on the action method, right? And so in Solution Explorer, I can go to my controllers. If I look at my home controller, okay, keep in mind in your method signature, right? You've got some basic pieces. You've got the access modifier. So I'm highlighting the keyword public. That's your access modifier. You have your return data type that says that this method returns a data type of iActionResult. Well, the capital letter I should signify in your brain that this is an interface. Therefore, any class that implements this interface is a valid return type. The identifier of our method is simply called index, and this returns view. Now, what's really interesting is that this method, if you were to kind of inspect this method, and let's see if I can, sometimes you, oh, come on. Okay. If I hold down Control, notice I can actually inspect the code. And notice the return data type out of my view is actually a class of view result. Okay, so this view method returns a data type of view result. Take a look at what a action hierarchy, a view result is a valid return type because it implements iActionResult. Okay, so I always found it a little bit weird, but it makes sense when you inspect the code that this view, this method call, view, returns a view result object. Okay, because I began to study this, I say, well, wait a minute. This return view, I would expect that to return a view object, and it's just not. If you get into the code, it returns what's called a view result. And right off the top of the bat, I just want to show you the different overloads of this view. If I begin to inspect view, notice there's one of 4 overloads. So just off of this, we can return view with no arguments. We can send a model in our view Well, to the view, right? Well, that allows us to have strongly typed views. So one overload is our default constructor, if you will, or our no params. You have one overload which will accept any data type of object. Now, notice the data type here is type object, so we got some upcasting going on. Remembering hierarchies of inheritance, object is the parent class of all children. Okay, the great grandmaster parent class of all other classes is object. Therefore, when we start talking about upcasting, which is very common in C#, any of our classes can be upcast into an object. Okay, so if you have a class of student, we can upcast that student into an object. We can return to a specific view. So I might want to return to a view called, about. Okay, and this would return to about CS HTML. So we can essentially, instead of going to the index.cshtml, we could say, no, I actually, after this method runs, I want to go to a different view, a different page on the front end. Okay, so that's a good overload. And the fourth overload is I want to go to a different view and I want to send some data to that view. Okay, so right off the bat, you don't have to get deep into this lecture to just look at the overloads of view, understand that view returns a view result, therefore this is a valid type. Okay, what else can we do? Well, you can kind of see we can send out the front door, if you will, to all sorts of different views, and taking you to a different web page on the front end. There are some redirect kind of things that we can do. And so, what if the web page is now found at a different URL, that kind of thing. We can have our backend methods send out JSON, which is not something that we do a lot in the book. However, if you think back to our Express days, like that's all we did from our backends. Like our backend APIs were sending JSON, right? And so we should be very familiar with our backend routes sending JSON, if you just kind of think about what we've done in the past. And so again, kind of like these last two here, we don't do a lot, at least out of the book, if you will. You can also send files to a front-end result. So these are just different ways, or excuse me, different data types that could be sent and so like when we say a view result, that's one thing. We can redirect to an action. So these are all types underneath the redirect result, right? So we're just kind of breaking it down a little bit more. Yes, sir? Please.
What's the difference between redirect to action and view? What's the difference between those two?
Yeah, redirect to action is going to take you to another method instead of going to a view, right? And so definitely we're going to do that. Yep.
And second one, so since we can send JSON into our views,
yep.
Could we fetch data from our bug tracker API and put it into our front end?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if that's still live and you have permissions, and that's a beautiful part about building these different, like you just got a back end that with the right permissions, your .NET front end could receive those results. So the answer is yes, they could play nice together, right? Absolutely. Yeah, I like the questions. Thank you. And so what we're looking at on this screen, suffice to say, these are all subtypes of action results. So these, these are just a few, but these are just a few more. And so I can't say anything on here is necessarily worth memorizing. It's just a lot of different types could be sent out of our actions. Again, we kind of look at the overloads of the view method. And then here you could see return to view, redirect to action. And so return, redirect to action. Okay. Now I use this in my code demo, right? That if you guys follow my code demo today, instead of, you actually can get some code reusability out of this, right? So you start by calling one method, and then instead of going out the front door to a view, you could say, okay, no, I actually want to redirect to another action and call it, privacy kind of thing. So after you run this method, it'll run this method, and then this would send you to the privacy CSHTML. Okay, so instead of going out to a view, to the front door as I call it, you kind of stay on the back end running more logic. And again, you can send files in JSON out the front door as well. Because of this, right? Because let's just go back to return view here. You could change the type to view result, and this would, of course, still work. Benefit of doing this? You could argue, although I don't know that I would, slightly more efficient, okay? Because a view ultimately does return a view result that the compiler doesn't have to resolve an action result. It doesn't have to say, okay, we're actually returning a view result. And so, but our machines are so fast that's, I would argue, insignificant. But however, you could also say from a programmer's point of view, if you know that you are returning a view result object, to be more specific, and so it might actually communicate a little clearer about the data type that you're returning. Okay. However, if you need the flexibility, you could just keep it action result, because that is certainly very flexible. Okay. So possibly you get a little performance boost by saying view result. Very negligible. I wouldn't even consider it worth worrying about. But I would also say, from a programmer's point of view, understanding what's going on under the hood a little bit always helps. Okay, so returning a more accurate return data type might help you understand a little bit more. Okay, so kind of the same thing here. You could say redirect to action result by calling a redirect to action. Okay. On to view data and view bag. Okay, so view data versus view bag. View data versus view bag. Okay, view data is a dictionary. You guys remember C# dictionaries? What do you remember about C# dictionaries? Okay, so they're in key value pairs, right? So if I just kind of look at line 20, we're looking at a dictionary. The syntax is an array. This is actually called an indexer that allows you to use different things besides numbers as your subscript for an array. Okay, you guys are very familiar with arrays: subscript, sub 0, sub 1, sub 2, sub 3, sub 4, sub 5. When you get into C#, you learn this little thing called an indexer. Indexers are where you can use different values as your subscript, such as strings. Okay? So this dictionary uses an indexer to say, hey, my subscript, my key, if you will, I'm calling this message, and the value that I'm putting into this subscript is hello from view data. Okay, so view data is a dictionary. View bag is a dynamic property. View bag dot message is hello from view bag. So they're coded a little differently. Fundamentally though, okay, here's the short version of this. View data and view bag are used to send bits of information from the controller to the view. Right? You guys have seen how we can read view bag and view data out of the view. So you load up data in the controller, you send it out the front door, you can read it in the view. Okay? There's no difference besides syntax. Should you use view data or should you use view bag? Well, on the surface, there's no difference. Syntactically, view bag is just easier. People prefer dot notation over dictionaries. Okay, it's just easier. In fact, when you really look under the hood, and this is kind of a weird thing, when you really look under the hood, you find out that view bag is actually a part of view data. Okay, so what I'm saying here is it makes no difference what you use. It's just a syntactic difference. There is one distinct advantage in that if I want my key to have a space, then you do need to use view bag. Okay, so there is an advantage to view data if you need a space in your key. But do you ever need a space? You could do different notation. You know, so if you prefer a space, okay, go ahead and use view data. Okay, but the short version of this is, you know, in my view, go ahead and use view bag over view data unless you want to keep a key there. There's a couple other scenarios that you could argue if you want to loop over your dictionary. You know, for example, here's loading up view data, key and value pairs, and there are some properties like a count, a keys and values that allow you to loop over your items in your view data, right? So if you really want to be able to iterate over your key and value pairs, right? There's no looping over a view bag. You can only loop over your view data. Okay, so those are really the scenarios that you could consider using view data over view bag. But that's like, I don't want to overcomplicate it. It's like, this is just a way to store information to send from a controller to a view. Okay, one's a dictionary, one's a dynamic property. They're used interchangeably except for in a couple scenarios. When you're storing data, this is really quite strange. In view data though, so like imagine your price is $9.99. C# is pretty strict in that view data, like there's no data type when you're putting the data in. Look at this. View data price is $9.99. Well, $9.99 is a double. Okay, C#'s strict, so you need to tell it it's a double. So even though we didn't put a data type on this view data going in, in order to get it out, you have to take that $9.99 because it's like, I don't know what the data type is, and you have to put a data type on it. You have to cast this view data price into a double on the way out. Okay, if you're going to use it, like take a look at what it's doing here. We're casting the price into a double, And then we're casting it into a string and putting a $sign on it and commas and decimal points. Okay, so ultimately you want this in a string, but to get it into a string, you gotta get it into a double first, because it is a double. Okay, so there's actually, now this problem, this challenge, okay, it is not quite so difficult with view bag, right? This whole like double casting it, which by the way, you guys remember this question mark. It's like, hey, only call this toString method if there is something to convert to a string, right? Only cast this into a double if there's something to cast into a double. In other words, if the price is null, well, you can't cast null into a double, that would crash. And so making these data types, nullable, right? So it's like, hey, only do this if. Yeah, Connor. Well, really, what does that do, right? That just makes it nullable. And so you want to, if there's a chance that price is null, then that's when you want to do that, right? So I wouldn't just do it all the time. I would do it on an as needed basis. And so if there's a chance that price can return null, then I would just say that's when you make the data type nullable.
Secondary question that's based on that. Let's say, for instance, I guess we'll just do this as you have a product page. It's better to set them as equal to null exclamation as opposed to string.empty.
On the model?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're talking about a product, and the question is, yeah, so a product should be a null, like an empty product, right? So I would set the product to be null.
You do the same with like price, but if you're doing like the name of a book, it could be
String.empty, yeah.
Okay.
So if your data type is an object type, you would set that default value to like a null object or an empty object, versus a string, you would set the string.empty. Just depends on the type. Okay, and so again, I guess my takeaway out of these last couple slides is that you're gonna have to go through some hoops. You're gonna have to jump through some hoops converting between types. When you put data into a view data, and there's less hoops to jump through when you put data into view bag. Take a look here. Price view bag price is $9.99. Well, here, because view bag is part of view data, you can actually loop over your view bag. I think I misspoke earlier when I said you can't loop over your view bag. You can loop over your view bag, but notice here there's just less converting between types. You could say item.value. Here's a similar example where I'm just taking my viewBag.price to a string currency. I didn't have to first take it into a double. It says Razor code that worked with a viewBag property without casting. Why is that? Because viewBag is considered a dynamic property, so it figures the data typed out when you put it in. Okay, so viewBag kind of does the work of figuring out the data type when you put the data type in. So advantage viewBag there. Okay, view data does not assume a data type for you. Again, Razor code that checks viewBag for null, right? So again, kind of the advantage of this if this price is null and you don't have that question mark there, your view will crash, right? This is Razor View code that if you don't have that question mark there, it will crash, okay? And I see it a lot in this class where, you know, where that kind of thing happens. So just nulling your types is what that is. Okay, use view data instead of view bag when you need a key with spaces, when you want to work with specific methods of the view data dictionary, like count or the clear. And it says when you want to loop through all the items in view data. However, we did see that you can loop through items in view bag, so I don't know. It really boils down to me like one scenario, and you don't even really need spaces, right? Your conventions should not require a space. If you have that option, okay. So, a little bit different there between view bag and view data, and then all the different types that can be returned out of your action methods. That's all good stuff. There is a book example, we're not going to go through it right now, of loading up these images and NFL teams, and Connor, to your question, notice your strings are typically initialized to a string.empty, whereas your object data types are set to nullable, right? That was essentially your question, yeah? So that's kind of the practice there. So these are the models that you kind of have in this application. There's a context file, you load up a database. It's an okay exercise to go through. I've gone through it. Notice they're changing the return data type of our method. We have a couple optional parameters that help us with filtering. We load up view bag properties. We add some custom routing. You know, here's where I've landed on this. If you finish like the labs and you just want some extra practice, this is not a bad exercise to go through, because, you know, it's kind of neat. It's got a bunch of images and filters and custom routes, and you're working with view bag and view data. I don't remember the IEnumerable team model. Oh. Yeah, okay. So this is yeah. So this is a Razor view that takes in a team object. And when you have an IEnumerable team, what is IEnumerable? IEnumerable means you can loop over it. And so you could just say the model is a single team, or a list. Excuse me, a list of teams. A list of teams. That's another way of writing that code. If you were to say a list of team here, and this is going to allow us to, well, we got a loop. Yeah, we don't need to explain every line here. Notice here, because we have a list of teams, we can loop through our teams, right? So you guys have done that, right? You guys have sent a list to the view and then looped over that. We got one person to shake their head yes. This is good. Okay. All right. We'll take our little first morning break, and then we're going to talk about the benefit of a view model when we come back from a quick morning break. Okay, back from a quick break to talk about the concept of a view model, a VM, which could also be virtual machine, but it's not. It's a view model. Right now, in our front end, on our views, you guys would all agree that it's a single thing. It's a single entity primarily, and if there's any, like there's a product, and a product might have a category. So I will say that we have a strongly typed view that is a product, and if there's any other data from your tables, that data is loaded up into ViewBag, right? So if there's multiple tables of data, you've got one type, one data type that's the primary type, and then you've got ViewBag to load up data from other tables. So this concept of a view model, what's the problem with view data? There's not really any problem with view data or ViewBag, but these are dynamic properties, and they can have the tendency to cause runtime errors. Okay, if you're loading data into ViewBag, into ViewBag, view data, then there can be runtime errors, and runtime errors crash the program, obviously, for the end user. That's not a good thing. Now, you would hope that you catch those runtime errors in development, right? You would hope that, hey, I'm loading data into ViewBag, view data, blah, 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 and I'm gonna, as a developer, I'm gonna test my application, and I'm not gonna ship it out the door to the client with runtime errors. Okay, however, you would agree that there's a chance that you don't catch all of your runtime errors. Okay, it happens all the time. There's a chance you don't catch your runtime errors. Therefore, you ship a product that crashes, okay, because of these runtime errors. Well, view model solves that problem. A view model is combining data from locations, and you have many tables. It's a normalized database. So you're gonna, in a real normalized database, you might have tens or even 100 tables. You might have data stored in all these different places. A view model is I view it as a join. If you want to join data in all these different places and put it in a single type, notice what this is. This is a single class that pulls data from a Teams table, that pulls data from a conferences table, that pulls data from divisions table. Okay? And what we can do is then we can send this view model out the front door to the view. So I think of a view model as a join of multiple tables worth of information to send to the view. That when you use this, the benefit is that this is now strongly typed. ViewBag and view data is not strongly typed. Therefore, you wind up with runtime errors. With a view model, if you don't code it correctly, it's strongly typed. You get a compiler error, right? A compile time error is always better than a runtime error, right? So what is the process? Well, the process is, typically you're mocking up your screen mockups, right? You're designing your web pages in a mockup, and you're putting what data you want in your mockup, right? And then based on the data that you want in your mockup, you go back and you make a view model that says, okay, I need to basically join table from here. I need to get some data from here. I need to get some data from here. I need to join these tables together, back together in one class that's strongly typed and send that out the front door, right? So if you kind of go through this Teams, this NFL Teams thing, the first demo is they're loading a lot of stuff up in ViewBag, and it works just fine. Okay, it's just subject to runtime errors. Okay, if you instead refactor this and you use a view model instead, and if you've got some type mismatch, if you've got a problem, you're more likely going to get a compiler error, which is better. Okay, so to take a look here, instead of just getting a single team, now notice we have a new type, a team view model. Okay, and you can you can pass this type around. It's an object, right? And you can pass objects into methods like they're doing here. And of course, now look at this line right here that I'm highlighting. We're returning our team's view model to the view. Ultimately, you know, whatever the logic does, we're sending this view model out the front door. So it kind of is what it sounds like. If you break down the two words, it's a model for a view. It is a view model. It's a very specific model for a view. And again, there's the benefits. Now our view, take a look at line 1 here that I'm highlighting. Our view accepts a view model as its type. Okay, and again, you can now get the methods. So there might be methods associated with it and properties associated with it. You know, there is a code. Like I said, you'll be coding a view model in the code along that I'm going to encourage you guys to do after this. So I'm not going to spend too much more time. Just the theory of a view model is the important part right now. Okay. Okay. This slide 35 goes back to this slide right here, and that one category of types were view results, and we looked at the view method and all the overloads. Now another type of redirection of return data type is redirecting. Basically, where do you send the execution of the code? And so if we kind of look at this, these are different methods where we can redirect to an action. I think I demonstrated redirecting to an action. So if I just kind of comment this out, right? And the data type is redirect to action result. Okay, so this becomes the return data type, and we can return redirect to action privacy. Okay, and so that's the simplest version of this redirect to action. The status code of like resources moving, and so it's very common to have a whatever.com and redirect it to a new permanent URL, rebranding. Twitter.com became X.com, whatever, right? So you're rebranding of these companies. You would redirect a permanent, so all of the requests that kind of come in for Twitter.com are permanently redirected somewhere else. And so you would hit, if Twitter.com was built on .NET Core MVC, which I don't think it is, but if it were, you could see a method like this to redirect all requests permanently somewhere else. Okay. And so that's kind of the difference between this column over here, which is kind of like, well, a redirect, it would be more temporary, like we're just redirecting for now, versus a redirect permanent. Can't say I use this a whole lot other than that one right there. Redirect to action is fairly common. And then they give some examples of like redirecting to external URLs versus internal URLs. So redirect result versus local redirect results. It's in the name the difference, right? Redirect to action result, redirecting to an action method within the current app. Redirect to route result, redirecting within the current app by using a named route. And so we learned about creating named routes in the last chapter. And so you could use this method to kind of redirect to that named route instead. Yes, sir.
Sorry, you might have said this already, but I was expecting. If you have a redirected action and you're redirecting to an action that you
It'll default to the get.
Always.
Yes. Yes.
You wanted it to, like, actually, never mind.
Yep. Good question. It'll redirect to the get. All right. And then there's overloads, right? So if I kind of go into here, and just like we did with the return view, if I start looking at the overloads of redirect to action, of course, the no argument, which I actually have not, if we just do that, that's valid. Let's look at what that says. Redirects to an action with the same name as the current one. The controller and action names are retrieved. So that doesn't even make sense to me. Number 2, we can overload it with a string. So redirect to action privacy. That's the one that I demonstrated. Action name as well as some route values, right? And so a lot of times you want to pass in like an ID or something like that. So you might need a route parameter sent in as well. You could redirect to action in a different controller. So you give it an action name and a controller name. So redirect to action list products, right? So list becomes the action, product becomes the controller. So that's a good one. Very useful methods here. Inspect, route values, controller. Same thing, action name, controller name, route values, so route parameters. Action name, controller name, and fragment seems pretty similar to the route parameters to me, because that's what those are called. Those are called fragments. Can't say I've used that one too terribly much. And number 7, route values and a fragment. Can't say I've used those overloads too much. But again, really some takeaways in this lecture. Just I would get familiar with all the ways you can redirect to actions and all the different ways you can send back views, right? Those 2 methods are the most common that we will use as far as all that's concerned. And in fact, I think we did this, right? We redirected to an action result, details, action, passing in the ID. So we've done that in a prior lab. Okay, pretty cool concept here. This concept of a post redirect get. I like this concept because it's one that we've all been to, right? So I want you guys to kind of just hear me out here for a second. You've all shopped online, yes? Has everybody shopped online? We've all shopped online. So you go to a shopping cart, right? And you click the button to purchase, okay? And did you give it a good click? Or did you actually click it? Did you miss the click? Is it spinning? Did I make the purchase? Is the purchase going through? Did it charge my credit card? What happens if I get impatient and I click buy again? Is it going to charge my credit card twice? Like, what happens if I click buy 3 times? Does it charge me 3 times?
Yes.
You know? Kind of like a uncomfortable situation, right? And so when you're clicking buy, right? You're doing a post. You're doing a post.
So like people that use the Target app some days.
Yeah, you're doing a post. You want to alleviate that confusion, right? And so that's what a post redirect get does. Is it essentially takes you to a landing page that says thank you for your purchase, right? You're going to post and redirect to a landing page that says order confirmation. Okay, so it's a post that redirects to a get that thanks them for their confirmation. And if they try and click the button again, you get this error message, right? The page you're looking for is used for information. The page you're looking for used information that you entered. Returning to that page might cause any action you took to be repeated. Do you want to continue? And so, let's see. Okay, I went ahead and I opened up an earlier, I think we did this in like chapter 4, where we had a movies database, and suffice to say, we have a get and a post. And so this is a very simple, turns out, this is just a little bit more theoretical because we've already been doing it. We just didn't put the name to it. And so what this does is we post to the server. It saves the changes to our database. So here we call the context movies remove. We basically, this line removes the movie from the table. This line saves those changes. It persists those changes to the table. And then here we redirect to the home index. Okay, what this line does, hopefully, is it stops your user from refreshing the page and getting this message. Okay, because if you didn't redirect to a get, there's the chance that they reform, and then what do? Well, they might click continue, and if they click continue, it might, run the credit card twice. It might try and delete the movie twice, what have you, right? So suffice to say, what does this do? Well, this post redirects to a get method, which that's the recommendation. Okay. Yep.
So you're saying if we didn't have that redirect there, that pop-up would come up, or do we have to code that pop-up to show?
No, that pop-up is a default from the browser. So that's a typical response from a browser.
So we would see that if we...
You would see that, yep. Yeah, this is a typical response from the browser. Well, what's the other option here? Because this is all that we've really been doing. You could return to a view elsewhere. Like you could return to the view, the delete view. I don't know, but that's all that we know. But it's just putting the lingo behind it. Okay. One last topic is this concept of temp data. Here's how temp data is different than the rest, and I kind of mentioned this before. Temp data is, and I can't remember the library. Toastify. It is Toastify. Temp data is a dictionary, kind of like view data. Except for view data, you put the data in the controller and you read it out in the view. Temp data, so it goes from controller to a view. Simply put, temp data, it goes from controller to controller. Notice here we're putting data in temp data inside of a method, and then we're pulling it out inside of this controller. And the whole point is once you read your temp data, once you read it one time, it is out of memory, right? So it's just a temporary variable. It kind of is, the whole point is for it to be read one time. And so you put it in here, you pull it out here, and then the temp data is gone. And then in this case, what they do is they put it in view bag. They put the message in view bag, and then you could use that in the model. Right, so here there's an if statement, kind of interesting. If your temp data keys contain a message, so here's some Razor syntax. to look to see if you've got some temp data called message, and if you do, you can get a little HTML on the page that says the message in your temp data. Okay, so that's the idea. If you want to persist temp data, there are some methods to kind of like let you persist it. Again, the default behavior is to go out of scope as soon as you read it. So if you want to keep the message, you could do like a keep message kind of thing here. And then you can read it and it doesn't go out of scope. And so temp data has some methods that that allow you to do that. And this is an example of using tempdata.peak. The peak method that belongs to temp data is just another way of reading it without marking it as read. So peak is a way of like reading the data and then you never mark it for deletion if you peek at it. So peak never marks it as read. Keep, use a normal read and keep when you want to use a condition to determine whether to mark the value as unread. So it's like, you know, you put it in an if statement. And other than that, it's just code demonstrations. Again, that's temp data. And here's looking at your temp data and displaying this H4 if the temp data exists. Again, you get a little pop-up on the screen, kind of a one-time thing. Okay, so that's the theory that exists in Chapter 8 at a high level. I know I covered it relatively quick, but hopefully you found that not so terribly painful.